Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
Amine.
Today we're doing another classic album review. This time we're checking out the 1985 album, The Head on the Door by The Cure. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So The Cure's sixth studio album was released on August 30th, 1985. I think all of the Cure albums by The Cure have been produced by Robert Smith. This album in particular, though, this was the first album by the band to be fully written and composed by Robert Smith alone. You know, I think that's like, so The Cure, they're a really interesting band because they've gone through this really interesting evolution across, especially their 80s albums. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of hard to kind of put them all in one genre.
Right. Well, their first album, Three Imaginary Boys, is essentially kind of a pop album.
Well, I think it's technically like a post-punk album is how it's classified.
Yeah, but it's I don't know, it's just got a lot of pop elements to it that aren't present going forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say that because there are some elements, pop elements that do go forward, but not on that level. Yeah. You know.
And I think that's kind of the big thing for me with The Head on the Door is I think this was the album where they actually put more pop elements into it.
Yeah.
Into that sound. And like when I listen to this album, like the big thing that I noticed right away is it's interesting because it's a cohesive album,
but it's very eclectic.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very. I would say it's varied across. There's a lot of albums where you have this like cohesive sound, and this album is cohesive while also being, I guess, eclectic is probably a good way to put it.
Because it does. I mean, it starts off kind of with a very poppy track. And then the very next track is not pop at all. And then the third track is very kind of dark.
Yeah.
But then it kind of goes back to pop again. It's kind of all over the place in terms of what it is presenting itself to be.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, a lot of albums in the world of music that are like that I tend to like.
Yeah.
I don't know where I fall on this album. As I was telling you off air, it's not my favorite Cure album at all. But I definitely see the merits of it because I like it being eclectic. Yeah. I like it having, a varied taste throughout.
I think the thing that where this album kind of separates itself from some of the other ones are like the big difference between this and an album like Disintegration or Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is The Head on the Door doesn't have any of those big hits on it.
Right.
And I think that's kind of why I know as far as like fans of The Cure go, they all look at this as a really good album. I would put this in my top 5. But I think overall, as far as the mainstream goes, this album's kind of been overlooked for the last 40 years.
Yeah, I don't know. If I'm really putting it up against other albums, I like 17 Seconds more. I like Pornography more. I like Disintegration more. And I'm not going to... It's not because there's no big hits or any of that stuff. It's like, I don't know. There's just something about this album that feels, when I listen to it, lesser than those other albums. I can't really put my finger on it, but it does. It almost feels like it's either like you can either look at it like because it is fully written by Robert Smith. You can look at it as like the proto album of what was going to come.
I would say it's a transition.
Yeah,
it's a transition from that early period, which included Pornography, to what they would do on Disintegration, what they would do on The Wish.
It's hard to say. Like I said, it does feel less to me. I can understand personally why it may fall kind of behind in terms of popularity on the mainstream level. Yeah. And it doesn't have anything to do with the number ones and the singles and all that. It's just as a unit. I personally don't think The Cure have ever made a bad album. So I'm not saying this is a bad album.
I might argue.
I know that. You might argue that. I don't think they've made a bad album.
And they're one of my favorite bands, and I would argue.
Doesn't mean that all their albums are completely great, but every album has great songs on it, to the extent that it makes every album above average for any comparative album of their years that they came out. I guess is what I'm saying. It's not that they're all great, but they all have greatness in them, I guess would be my argument. And this is no different. It's just if you're comparing all the Cure albums, for some reason this one just doesn't work for me.
I think kind of going back to what I was saying before, this is an album where it's an album that is accessible musically, but still I think kind of complex, especially compared to other albums around that time period. And I think that's kind of always been the thing with The Cure, though, is they have these songs that are easy to listen to, easy to connect to, while also being like there's nothing simple about the music that the Cure make, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
Well, I mean, I guess on a technical level maybe, but on how it works and how it plays out, and it's how it does, the music does work on an emotional level, and sometimes counterintuitive to what the lyrics are doing too. So the music is doing one thing and the lyrics are doing another thing. So there's a weird
dichotomy. Yeah,
with between those two things that's present in all of the Cure's music, at least especially with anything that Robert Smith wrote. Yeah. That I think works on all their albums. It works here too. There's rare occasions where the music and the lyrics do kind of mesh up. Blood would be an example of that. Yeah. But there's some songs that sound downright upbeat on here, but if you actually listen to the lyrics, there's a sadness to them, which obviously is present.
It's The Cure, so
yeah. I really don't. What I'd like to know, and this is not necessarily about this album, I want to know how, aside from Robert Smith's look, I don't get how they're considered a goth band. I really don't.
Because they've always had that like gloomy kind of sound, even though their music isn't necessarily like gloomy. I think it's the image of the sound, or the image of the sound.
Well, and I guess you could argue that it comes from the emotion that comes up from the music, and then the emotion that comes up from the lyrics.
Yeah, but they do have some very gloomy music also in their discography. I think
every artist does. Yeah. I to me, that's the things that work on this album are the things that are distinctly Cure. When you listen to it, obviously, you hear Robert Smith's voice, you know who you're listening to. You may not know the name, but you know that you're hearing something that's unique enough.
Yeah.
And like I said, the lyrics tend to have a slightly darker tone to them on an emotional level, because a lot of it is about relationships and things like that. Yeah. Whereas the music is its own thing. It's this weird, like you said, weird dichotomy that really just works across the board for The Cure. And all that's present on this album, for sure.
As far as my negatives for this album, I guess there's only a couple things I can really point to. I feel like it's a little overproduced at times. I think it's maybe a little too slick in parts, and I don't think it really meshes necessarily well with the music that you're listening to. But outside of that, I mean,
I would agree with the overproduced part of it. And I think sometimes it just lacks energy, too. And I'm not talking about, like tangible energy that you get from, like, a band that was more rock-oriented, hard rock or anything like that. It does, to me, that maybe that's the other thing. It doesn't have that same energy of some of the albums that came before it and some of the albums that came after it.
Yeah. Well, because the albums that came out after that are Disintegration, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Wish, and Disintegration were like the three albums, not necessarily in that order.
Right.
They came out after this album. So it's kind of hard to compare those albums to this album.
Right. And maybe that's what it is, like you said. Maybe it's because it's a transitional album. You're gonna have that weird, like, do I like it or don't I like it kind of feeling, because that's what I have. It's like I like it, but then I don't think about it when I think about The Cure. It's just kind of like stuck there in the middle in this like weird void for me.
And another thing I guess not really knock it on, but I guess kind of a negative also is it's not as, like, if you listen to the band's first 5 albums, there's a lot of really experimental elements on pretty much all those albums. And this is probably, at this point in the band's career, probably their least experimental album. And maybe that's, like you said, it is a transition album from the early period to maybe a little bit more of the poppiness that they would have kind of moving forward. And maybe that kind of plays into some of that.
Well, music was changing too.
Yeah, and in the world. In '85, it was definitely changing, at least in the mainstream for sure. As far as the songs go on the album, I don't think there's a bad track on there. A Night Like This is probably one of my favorite
That's a good
songs by The Cure, and that wasn't even one of the singles off the album. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the name of the first song on there. I guess I can pick up the album and actually look at it. It's In Between Days. That's what. It's a great way to kick off the album. It's one of my favorite tracks. I think that was the first single or the second single off of there. At the time, it was the band's most successful album in England. But
Well, and it's one of the poppier tracks on the album too.
yeah.
Actually, it's one of really just two that I would consider to be like pop songs.
All right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this album?
On a scale of Cure albums, I'd rate it 1 to 10. I'd probably rate it like a 6.5.
Okay.
On a scale of like 80s albums in general, it might be as high as 8.
Why the difference there?
Well, because if you're comparing, like I said, I don't think The Cure have ever made a bad album. So you're comparing The Cure to a bunch of other things. They really do kind of exceed most expectations. But when you're looking at the Cure catalog as a whole,
Kind of comparing this to other albums.
right, I think it falls short as a Cure album, but not as an 80s album.
Yeah.
So I'd say 6.5 would be my score, and if I'm rating it comparatively to Cure albums. An 8 if I'm comparing it to just other albums that came out in 1985.
It's hard for me because I kind of go back and forth. I'm pretty sure I will put this in their top 5. I think Disintegration's a better album.
Mm-hmm.
I think Wish is my favorite album by The Cure. I kind of go back and forth between, it's probably this and Pornography are probably 3 and 4 for me. So as far as like a 1 to 10 scale rating, I'd probably have to give it an 8. Just because, I guess I'll backtrack. I'll give it a 7.5. Mm-hmm. Only because it's a short album. It's only like 36, 37 minutes. I think they could have added a couple tracks on there. I think it is one of the shortest albums by the band. So maybe that's kind of a little bit of a detractor there. I'll give it a firm 7.5.
Okay.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think about The Head on the Door. What do you guys think of The Cure? Where would you rate it as far as their albums go? Love to know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure if you see a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time,
Talk to y'all later.
keep on spinning. Peace.